This is a Global Skills Podcast, conversations that shape the future of work and learning. We're exploring how we close the skills gap and build a future where everyone has the chance to thrive. From education to business, connecting people, ideas, and opportunities that drive change. It's about collaboration, curiosity, and creating real impact today. Because every skill learned brings us one step closer to a more inclusive world. The Global Skills Podcast, where learning and opportunity come together. Welcome to the Global Skills Podcast. Today, I'm joined by someone who has spent decades thinking deeply about Ireland, our people, our potential, and the opportunities that have shaped our economic success. Dannny McCoy is the CEO of Ibec, Ireland's largest business representative organisation, representing more than 10,000 employers across every major sector, including many of the world's leading global companies with their European headquarters here. Dannny has a unique vantage point on how Ireland competes, how our workforce is evolving, and what the next chapter of growth could look like in a rapidly changing world. Dannny, it's a real pleasure to have you on, and I'd love to go back to the very, very beginning, if I may.
Sure, Vanessa.
So you grew up in Tuam, and what's the one memory of that time when you were there that has sort of shaped the career that you've ended up having today?
Yeah, well, I can't admit to being thinking too deeply when I was there in Tuam, but I guess in terms of the backdrop, Tuam was a very unique town in the west of Ireland in that it had an industry, the sugar factory. You know, it's quite unusual in an agrarian-based society to have that form of industrialization from the 1930s. And so when I was growing up in the 70s and into the early 80s, its demise and its eventual closing down was always an overhang. And what would that mean for the people who work in the town, you know, unemployment, and how do you equip yourself for the future? And so education and training was clearly one of those kind of backdrops. And, you know, many of my contemporaries would have gone the apprenticeship route. And in fact, my family was a plumbing business. I went to more the university route as it happens, but you know, I'm very conscious of economic decline and demise and the capacity to be able to be educated and trained for new possibilities. So I guess that was kind of the formative backdrop.
And before we get into how actually apprenticeships have come full circle, what do you think Ireland has done right in the last couple of decades and getting to the position that we're in and where we have a lot of international companies basing here at their European head office?
Yeah, I think in retrospect, a kind of a broad education front. You know, sociologically, you could argue that because Ireland missed out on industrialization in the 20th century in the main, particularly the first, 7 or 8 decades. We used education to provide a broad base. We didn't, go down too specialist, particularly in our secondary education, our final exam, the Leaving Cert. Gave people kind of a more broad educational base, which was a very transferable skill. Unfortunately, lots of us had to take that away and emigrate, but it gave us a great advantage internationally. Obviously, we were advantaged by the fact that the English language became so dominant in the last generation for business and for getting around the world. So the combination of broad education, the luck of having English as pretty much our main language were the two big advantages I would consider.
And now we're very much viewed because we've had companies here and we have a very strong university system. We have a very rich talent base. Do you think that we're really leveraging the skills that we have in this country on a global scale?
Well, when you look back on business, it's about bringing various forms of capital together. You know, economists talk about the entrepreneur as somebody who brings the other factors of production and combine them. And so those factors, can be physical capital, machinery and equipment, obviously the need for the financial capital to bring that, to have a proposition to go and if you need to borrow money or to convince an investor. But the other one that's really crucial is obviously human capital. And so I think that in the last number of years, the human capital element is probably the distinctive factor. You can get machinery, equipment, you get finance. It's been pretty easy actually in the last half a generation to raise funds because of quantitative easing globally. So the distinguishing factor is human capital, but it's not just the skills embodied in the individual. It's also in the ecosystem, the capacity to be able to dip in and out of education and training. And that's actually probably one of the weak parts of Irish society. Our lifelong learning isn't as good as it should be, so we get a very good broad education base or a skills base, typically into the early 20s. And then the retraining is not what it should be. And I think that's probably one of the more limiting factors for us over the coming decades with all of the technological change we're experiencing through AI, and then also globally on the geopolitical situation that's changing quite dramatically. We need to be adaptable at whatever stage we are in our careers.
And I think that you're raising a really good point around the adaptability. There's a lot of redundancies happening, but they're not necessarily hitting media because they're subtle. They're voluntary redundancies or
Yeah.
small percentages happening. And the reality is that people have the ability to reskill and upskill, but there seems to be a disconnect between workforce planning, learning and development, talent acquisition. And some of the leaders we've had on the show are talking about we need to bring all of these areas together and have one ecosystem. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, personally, make the point that it is remarkable to me, and I think to anybody else, is that we've a lot of discussion about the state of the world. But one state of the world right now, and still the case, nearly every single jurisdiction globally has a problem with getting employees, not the unemployment problem we thought that would never be solved. And that's a really, important thing to point out because what bedeviled, certainly the first half and maybe longer in my own career was the overhang of unemployment, be that in Ireland or in Europe more generally. So it is stunning how low the unemployment rate is globally. And so clearly people find new jobs because technology has been relentless during that phase, particularly going from the computer age and into more recently cloud and data centers and social media, etc. So the technological advancements has been incredible in the last even 15 years. And yet the labor market has been tight. So we don't need to be nihilistic about new technologies emerging. We have plenty of experience of adaptability. The initial disruption can be significant, and I think that's what we're experiencing right now. I think AI has hit a tipping point. I think it'll hit a number of tipping points, but one of them during 2025 has certainly had impacts on the labor market. I've had to stylize it. I would have thought start of the year, people were concerned that AI was going to, blow up the whole world out of some kind of, dystopia of a machine going bad on us. And then as the year moved on and people started to get exposure to products like Copilot or Gemini or, uh, Chat GPT, they suddenly sort of say, oh, hang on, this can do human activities a lot faster, more efficient. And so you have a combination of employers not sure about how they're going to be able to adapt this AI, but actually starting to freeze employment decisions. And as you said, those are kind of the silent. They're not necessarily people being laid off. Ironically, it is the tech sectors that you're seeing most of the big layoff announcements of 25% headcount reduction or whatever. Now, slightly they're eating their own dog food there, as the term goes, because they're trying to prove that the products themselves are labor replacing, which is the kind of the appeal to the business community that the adoption of AI will increase efficiency, but it will also allow you to do it with less labor. And while that sounds like a bad thing, it's not necessarily, because in this tight labor market that we have globally, getting people to do much more productive activities and take away some of the kind of drudgery and tedious work that these large language models are providing to us now is this could be a win-win situation. But it's just that we've hit that tipping point of fear. So there's a fear in the labor force that jobs are going to be displaced and it's not clear what the new ones are going to be. And so this is particularly true intergenerationally as well. We're seeing lots of people coming out of university struggling now this year to find new opportunities, to find entry points into organizations. So there's an intergenerational aspect of this as well. So even those kind of digital natives are struggling now because partly what AI is offering is, a brain power replacement. And, universities and so on give us great graduates and great citizens, actually. That's the important bit as well. Citizens will come on to, I'm sure. But in the short term is that AI looks like it's replacing the brain, just like mechanization was kind of replacing the hands in mass employment. And then the question is, where does it go next? I would contend that if we move from the hands to the head, the next place will be kind of be to the heart in terms of that idea of I see care as much more than just the minding of the young or the vulnerable or the old, although there will be lots of jobs in those spheres. There's also the kind of the care of passing on wisdom, coaching, advising, and that's what happens in societies. A country like Ireland, we used to watch, when we were poor in the 70s, 80s, we'd watch Dallas or something, that the great rich families of Texas, and that they'd have shrinks, psychiatrists. We'd be kind of going, wow, what's the story with these people? And now if you stand back and you watch the amount of interventions we have in our society in terms of even the business context, business coaching, or interventions with, the realization about well-being and particularly mental health, so having advisors, or in terms of for children to have interventions with psychiatrists or with speech therapists, etc., of which we don't have enough. So to free up from the kind of drudgery, as you might call, of being an analyst, and trudging through data and writing reports that are being replicated 1,000 times in different offices around the cities, we could be freeing up this talent to actually do the things that actually matter to people and have more of those kind of caregivers.
It's a really interesting point that you say about we're at the tipping point of AI and fear. I remember attending an event by Dr. Joe Dispenza, a neuroscientist, and he talked about humans would be far more comfortable being uncomfortable than having to change. That would bring them more comfort just because we like the familiar, we don't like the unknown, and we don't know what the future holds. We're watching countries, though, really advance on skills and AI. Like they're connecting the dots quickly. You've got China that's brought AI education across all the schools for under 10-year-olds. You've got the Middle East that are really connecting university through academies and apprenticeships with industry. How do you think we're faring on that front? And is there a best in class country that you feel in the world that is nailing skills and AI advancements?
Well, to the last answer, no. And I'd be pretty definitive that there is no country advantage, because my experience is the distribution of skills and adaptability and first movers and laggards and all that is pretty consistent in humanity, and it's pretty evenly distributed between every country. I think what can help is not actually from the ground up, but it's more the policy setting environment. And that's where I think that it's important that governments on their educational and skills policies open up access so that those who are uncomfortable, they're uncomfortable because things are unknown usually, fear of the unknown. And so to make AI a known, whether it's adapted or not, is kind of depends on the individuals, depends on whatever, but to actually remove the kind of unknown nature of it is to ensure that there's a population-wise educations and skills matching that's provided. And I know that's talking your book, Vanessa, but I think that's really the place to go. So I'm not sure there's any society innately um, has an advantage. You mentioned China and so on as well. I mean, we see how China has advanced on the frontier, but actually China has huge problems. So it has lots of zombie companies. It's attempted to try to pick winners, but picking winners, they've a lot of losers there as well. So they're carrying a lot of dead wood in terms of their industrial policy. And that comes back. So macroeconomically, China is not in a good position, really. It's got a huge real estate overhang. It's a population that's declining. It's an aging population. And so it has its own pressures that we tend not to talk about. It's a fear of some countries coming and gaining advantage. I think that's part of the geopolitics fear that's out there that's matching the AI one. So it does feel like two things coming at once. But I think a society that actually is well-rounded and well-educated and knows what the opportunities are will win out in the end. But that requires activism from the government effectively to identify skills, and education is really important. and to provide the opportunities that people can know what they don't know, and then match those skills with those opportunities. So, yeah, I think we can do it much more systematically and not be too worried about countries that are in vogue at any one time.
Think we've touched on obviously the challenges for early talent, but there's a lot of moving trends online with people who are maybe in their 40s, 50s, they've had a career for 20, 30 years. They're actively looking for employment. It's proving to be challenging. And I guess my question was around there are industries that are really needing skills in demand. We've touched on it, defense, for example, and there's transferable skills. But if we look at the current ecosystems of job searching, they tend to, in cases, companies are putting in, unfortunately, AI to screen CVs to see suitability for roles, and they're not necessarily recognizing transferable skills. What do you think the opportunity is around transferable skills and touching on the citizen? Because obviously there's a ripple effect. If you're not earning, you can't afford your home, you can't afford, food for your family and so on. What do you think can be done around bridging that gap and making transferable skills much easier?
Yeah, well, look, I think we're all used to the buying on the rumor, selling on the fact when it comes to the labor market, that people that can impress in interviews and their CVs look good. And then suddenly, when you actually have made the decision, you see that what's kind of missing is some kind of X factor, which is probably often hard work, we would describe it as. And that doesn't mean just putting in long hours, but people who are able to work smart, regardless of the new job, I think is and gets on with their colleagues, that kind of sociability, that the screening from the CV to even the interview, even without AI, was always a pretty hit and miss. And so, if AI was able to do what we as humans aren't able to do, that would be its big advantage. The real limitation about AI at the moment, it's merely doing what we do faster and possibly not as well. So, it's the element of people having that kind of X factor, which I think is bringing much more empathy and sociability and capacity to make networks than specific skills, because those skills, as we know, can go out of fashion quite significantly. So an educational system that raises a kind of a consciousness, awareness of your environment, interaction with other people, and the capacity to know, the knowledge to know that your career is going to change quite significantly and that you should be confident that you have the coping capacities to adapt. And I think that coping part is probably where a lot of the education and skills curricula really needs to kind of focus in on, because to get information or to get data is becoming so easy with AI. It's moving through the phases that you ultimately bring it down into knowledge and then wisdom. And I think that's that interface between knowledge and wisdom is where that notion of the heart comes in. It's not just, when I say heart, I'm not really just talking about kind of some soft approach here. I think even that kind of wisdom in hard topics is really important. The wisdom to be able to make the decisions and know that they have social consequences that actually have feedback loops. And I think too often you would see leaders who make big decisions that sound, very efficient, very right, might be around issues like return to the office or whatever. What gains you if all you get is a disgruntled workforce who don't put
Correct.
the effort in because they're sapped of energy because of the transportation costs involved in terms of time and money, and also the pickup that they'll need to do in their home life and their work life balance, so that kind of empathetic approach and capacity for adaptation, I think, is more about the social construct of the workforce and the labor market as it impacts with industry right now. And those are the skills that are needed, not so much the base of gathering data and analyzing it.
Yeah. And it's probably hard for those that are in university to hear that, it's the development of those human skills. And definitely the leaders that have been coming on from L&D and talent are saying they're seeing that more and more.
And that's why you should come to the office, actually, as a young person, because it's not even so much that, magic happens, that leaders will often say, well, creativity happens at the office. And there's a truth to that, but it doesn't happen every day. doesn't happen every hour, so you can come into an office for a week and look around and nothing spectacular has happened, right? But it's been open to the opportunity that when it does happen, you're in the right place at the right time, So it's not to say it's 5 days, 8 hours, but, young people should be open to those communal opportunities, the mix and match. But diktats from the top to say you must do the following, I think, doesn't get the kind of reaction in terms of productivity or a workforce that's committed and feeling included.
I remember I spoke at an Ibec event for HR leaders just over a year ago, and it actually inspired a lot of the work that we're doing now around closing the skills gaps for companies. At the time, we were just working with educators, but I asked the room, I think it would have been about 90 to 100 leaders, which of you have an organization that has a skills gap? And practically every hand went up. And the following question really surprised me. It was, who knows exactly what the skills gap is today and in the near future? And I think it was 5 hands or so went up. So
Fair.
there's this lack of skills intelligence. And I'm about to ask this question because I think this is what universities really need from industry. But how important do you think life skills intelligence in terms of what roles can be augmented, automated, who needs upskilling, reskilling today and in the future is to the success of companies and leaders listening?
Well, when you mention universities, one of the features that universities have experienced as well in societies is the fact that we've got a tight labor market. So the option to be working while at university is there, so you're kind of somewhat distracted, maybe not from your studies per se, but from the sociability point of view, because universities are about making those networks and capacity, as a test bed for going into business. So that's an aspect of it. So those life skills, you might call them those kind of soft skills, really crucial for the education and something that universities need to work on because that is actually the glue for business. The very specific skill sets can be acquired by a person whose mind is open. And that's why I think in Ireland, our education system during my time had a very inductive aspect to it rather than the eductive to lead out. We were leading in. We wanted to be inducted into a job. So we kind of had the same mentality of apprenticeship, just doing it in a kind of a posher place. But we still wanted to be inducted to get at a job. And I think that the um, eductive to actually bring people out of themselves to see that their talents can be applied in places they hadn't even thought about before gives that confidence. So for the universities, it's not about specific skills. It's about educating more broadly. And that's why things like philosophy are really important to be able to think better, to be able to analyze. And, that's why originally university and philosophy, the PhDs, the doctors of philosophy, regardless of your specialization, it's the philosophical aspect. And of course, we, at least my generation, thought that that's philosophy. That won't get me a job. So I'm not doing it. And yet the irony of it is something like philosophy could get you any kind of job.
Mm.
And other disciplines as well. It's the analytical framework that's important, be it law or economics or medicine or accountancy or science. It's more the philosophical view of how things interact rather than the specific information. Anybody who's got a trained mind can absorb any kind of information. They may not feel they have an aptitude or a desire for it, but if you've got a good framework, you can fit anything into it. And I think that's where universities can provide that framework, and the more kind of liberal arts interpretation, the more exposure to get to more things rather than funnel in straight away from the age of 18 into this is what I want to do. Well, what you want to do may not be what society wants you to do or values you doing. And you need to
Mm.
be open to that.
Mm. Or even, I mean, I don't know where this survey was, but something like 70% plus of people are not necessarily happy in their careers because we were children when we chose our path.
Sure.
And now AI is opening up everything. And I guess looping it back to the companies then, If the skills required for companies now today, such as these human skills that you describe, how do companies need to evolve or change their whole look of how they recruit, how they develop talent? Do they need a whole new skills taxonomy that's leaning more towards human skills?
Yeah, I think the best description of a non-human assistant, effectively, like a sheepdog's a non-human assistant, but very important. And so is that capacity to be able to, as humans, to be the human in the loop, as they say in AI, remains really important. And I think it's that confidence of exposing people to AI is to say this can be your assistant, but it may not be in the job that you think you have right now. But AI is an enabler rather than a replacer. And the jury's out. Technologists and economists tend to differ on this. Is the technologists believe that the world will be fundamentally changed by this technology. Economists, of which I'm one, is that this isn't actually that great a game changer. We've been through these before. We had cloud, we had the PC, and so some things are absolutely core and fundamental. One is on the consumer side. We're always going to need to consume, but we're also going to need to save. And we do that because we're intergenerational and overlapping generations. We care about people we have. So humans don't actually change and won't have changed in 10 years' time. The same basic prompts, to use that word from AI, exist within us in terms of caring about people, caring about our own position, and that overlapping generations. These are deep structural parameters that were there 500 years ago through all kinds of industrial changes, from electricity to mechanization, computerization. We still are the same type of individuals, just in a different environment. And similarly, in the industrial base, in terms of production, you're going to need that combination of bringing together machinery, equipment, be that AI, with the human aspect, because we won't, we may get some factories that are in the dark right now because they don't need lights because there's no humans. The robots just work in the dark in huge factories. If you think about it, why would you need lights on? The machine doesn't need the light. It's the human that needs the light to see the machine. But these are exceptionals. They're on the, you know, all businesses are going to need the interoperability between humans and machines. What ratios there are, they'll change, but there'll be some industries that'll be very heavily human because that's where the value is, and that's what people will be prepared to pay by. I'm struck, and conscious of our time, I'm struck even by the new jobs that have developed even in the last 5 years. I see more nail bars in Ireland now than there are public bars. There are more latte studios on High Street as you're walking along, looking in the glass. They used to be down the back, for privacy. Now people like to be on the front street going through their exercise because work-life balance has a premium on it now. It's not something that you'd be hiding away when you're not working in case people think you're not working hard enough. And then also we see things where pets have become so significant. I'm not sure it's going to be the first pub in Dublin, but there's one just opening up near me where one of the jobs was to be a dog concierge. Concierge will bring the dog to the table. Obviously, the human will come along for the ride as well, because I don't think that the dogs are necessarily consumers right now, but they have people who are willing to consume for them.
That's incredible. I know we're nearly short on time. I just have two final questions. My first one, and you can keep it brief if you wish. I know a lot of people maybe talk about the doomsday, and I know you've referenced before the danger zone if we don't make the right choices. But
Yeah.
I'd rather ask you, if you had a magic wand over the next few years and you could wave it, what would you like to see happen for the Irish economy when it comes to the companies that we have here?
Well, I'd like things, economically to be just the same as they are now, but socially, that we actually transfer the resources we have into socially productive activities. And these include things like our very basic shelter issue about housing, about infrastructure, because it's very hard when you have an economy that in GDP terms has trebled since 2000, of household wealth, which has more than doubled, to say anything economic, to say, I wish was better than this, because this is pretty spectacular. And the fact that Ireland appears to be an experiment to that adage that I just want to prove that money can't make me happy. We certainly have the money, but we don't seem to have the happiness. And so it's meant to try and transfer, put a bit more premium on actually doing the things that are right. We know what things are right in order to provide those basic shelter factors, that more tangible things rather than just money and experiences, great as they are. So that would be my hope, that we actually have more experience economy driven activities and experience economy driven businesses.
We have a closing tradition of asking 2 questions, but you only have to answer one. The first question is, have you a skill that you used when you were young that you don't use anymore that you'd like to?
Yeah.
The second question is, if someone is listening today, maybe a business leader, and they're thinking, I am worried about the skills gap in my organization and how do I future proof so I'm here with my business in a few years' time, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I can't think of any skills I had that I would like to replicate. So I think they were absent to start with. It's not that I've just forgotten about them, so I'll skip over that one. But look, the world keeps changing, and AI is definitely transformative. There's too much hype about it, actually, and particularly in terms of valuations. The amount of resources that are going to technology companies and AI will ultimately prove to be an unproductive use of capital. But the problem about that is it crowds out other sectors that might be more socially impactful. While technology and AI is fantastic and will be fantastic in the future, right now there are industries that are getting starved of capital in terms of things that could be much more socially beneficial in terms of medical technologies or new pharmaceutical products. And unfortunately, we also now, into geopolitics, is that we also have to put a premium on security and defense because, again, these deep structure parameters, unfortunately, with humans, we don't change. And so we haven't put things of the past behind us in terms of geopolitical tensions and people invading each other. And a lot of our skill sets and gaps will actually manifest themselves through the security and defense industries, which are going to be a huge growth area over the next 10 years.
I would love to do another episode with you, Danny. But on that note, I just wanted to say thank you so, so much, because I think of the leaders we've had on, we've had brilliant insights to industries, but you've given this macro view. But what's clear to me is your heart and head have to be part of every plan that you're making for your business or the economy. So just thank you so much for coming on.
Not at all. Thanks, Vanessa.
Whether you're leading a business, shaping education, planning your next career move, or just starting out, you're part of a global conversation about how we learn, work, and grow. If you've enjoyed this episode, tap subscribe so you never miss the latest insights. And if you've a moment, leaving a quick rating really helps people find the show. For early access to new episodes, event invitations, and the chance to connect with others driving real change, join the community at globalskillspodcast.com. The future of skills belongs to all of us. Proudly sponsored by Abodu, empowering organisations and educators with world-class skills technology to build a better future for everyone.